The market for games is in a constantly shifting state, and one of the latest trends to arise that isn't something like a live service or battle royale is classic video game remakes. Obviously, we've been getting remasters for quite a while now, but with titles like Resident Evil 2, the upcoming Dead Space remake, and the supposed Last of Us remake, games are going the way of cinema with new and technically advanced versions of what came before. Hello there, everyone. It's Aaron here, and to discuss this very topic with me today, we've only gone and snagged ourselves Stephen Tailby from the Push Square website. Thanks for joining me, Stephen.
No problem. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah, so we're just going to run through some of the pros and cons of this whole topic. It's going to be a lot more laid back, a bit more of a podcast-like style, but we'll try and keep it relatively short. So let us know what you think of this format down below and whether you'd like to see more stuff like this as well. So I suppose best place to start is, Stephen, like, are you even a fan of classic video game remakes at this point? What are your overall impressions of them?
Yeah, I guess I do really quite like them. I mean, like, I wouldn't want that to be like the only thing that ever happens. Like, I don't want it to spiral out of control or anything, but I think the occasional remake is pretty cool. I think there's a couple of reasons why they're valuable. I think one is it gives people who wouldn't have played the original a chance to see what all the fuss is about, right? So, like, you take, well, I guess any of them, right? Like Shadow of the Colossus or the Resident Evil remakes. You know, it gives people who might not have been there the first time around to see why they are so revered, right? And then the other reason is just, it's just nice to see like your favorites kind of like revisited, retuned, and like just like brought bang up to date.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I think for me, like, I was never, I think what people forget quite a lot of the time is, there's this general acceptance of like, well, everyone's supposed to have played everything that ever came out for the last 30 years or so, but like, games have been around for quite a long time now that people weren't playing games when Resident Evil 2 first came out. I was like 3 years old or something like that,
right?
So I've been loving this whole thing with like games like that coming back. Resident Evil 2 ended up being my favorite game of I think it was 2019 that game came out. And that's because, like, I had never experienced that game, but I'd always heard about it. And you're spot on, I think, with just, it gives people like me, I would say, the opportunity to play these games that just, I suppose it's also like how willing you are to go back and play something on an older platform. For me personally, I'm not huge on going backwards like that.
Yeah, sure.
I'm pretty, stingy with I really like the nice graphics and the quick loading times and the smooth mechanics as well.
Yeah.
So I really struggle to go back like that. Is that something, or are you more like willing to go back to those kind of games?
Yeah, I think, like, not to get too off topic, but like with the new PS Plus tiers coming out, they're obviously going to introduce a lot of classic games to people who subscribe to that top version. And like, I'm kind of quite excited about the idea of revisiting some like PS1, PS2 games. So I'm not averse to kind of looking back at legacy stuff. No, I think there's still value to be found in games of that era, but I totally get it. Like, are people really gonna want to necessarily go back to Resi 2, the original, when the new one is so good and like looks so nice and like it's probably better written? I don't know, because I've not played either of them myself. But you know what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with you in a roundabout kind of way.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, if you don't have that nostalgia factor to these games, then, like, personally, I probably just wouldn't enjoy it. I wouldn't see what was so good about it, because you can't put your frame into, your head into the space of this is what games were like back then or whatever, So I think they are nice in the way, like you were saying, you can go back and enjoy the game if you have that memory, but playing the new version as well is like, oh, this is really cool to like bring this up to the modern age. But what I'm kind of interested in then is, like, what do you think now constitutes a video game, like making a video game remake, because obviously there's nothing official in this, but it's kind of widely accepted that The Last of Us remake will be coming out at some point, possibly in the next year or so.
Right.
That game, as of next year, will be just 10 years old. Is that something like, do you think that's worth remaking at this stage already?
Yeah, that one in particular is tricky, I think, because I had a look like not long before we recorded this, and yeah, so The Last of Us, the original on PS3 came out in 2013, so yeah, it's like about 8 now. It doesn't feel like a lot of time has passed since that original version and this supposed remake that's coming out in, well, presumably the next couple of years, right? So I totally understand why people are a little bit like against the idea of remaking this game, especially because it already has a remaster on PS4 that plays perfectly fine, and looks great still. So with The Last of Us in particular, I'm kind of not super into that idea. I'm
very, very curious as to how, like, the difference it will make. Last of Us is one of my favorite games like ever. So I was a wee bit like, initially I was like, what? Why would you do that? However, at the same time, I think when you look at it from the angle of, we're actually going to take this to make part 1 and 2 a more cohesive package that you could play through one to the other and see no difference. That, in a way, is kind of the selling point to me, because I just remember being so impressed with the facial animation, the leap that they had in part 2, especially with like the eyes had so much life in them.
Yeah.
And I think when you look, at part 2 and then you go back to part 1, you go, yeah, I can see where this could be better.
Yeah, for sure. I do agree. I think it would be interesting to see them sort of like on the same level. And then, yeah, like you say, you can play the first one and then go straight into the second one, and there's no, in a nice way, there's no jump in quality from one to the other. I suppose the other aspect of The Last of Us as well is you've got this HBO series, right? So there's going to be a renewed interest, or like maybe there's going to be a new audience for the games, like for people who are just watching the TV drama and haven't engaged with the games at all, and then they find that they've got this new remake to play, and then they can be like, oh, and then there's a sequel too. So it does kind of make sense when you think about that.
I had theorized in a previous video that I thought next year, with the 10th anniversary coming in around like mid-June of 2023, I had a theory that we would see the remake and the television show, coincide, and then potentially them releasing the part 1 and 2 PlayStation 5 versions, because as I only learned like yesterday, that the PS5 version isn't actually a PS5 version of The Last of Us Part 2. It's just like a boost in frame rate. It's still playing through backwards compatibility.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. That it is a new way to just boost awareness of it to a new audience, especially if people are watching the show. But there is also the aspect of, like, with every new generation, that's always going to be someone's first console. So there might be someone out there picking up the PlayStation 5 and it's the first ever time they've touched a gaming console or switched to a PlayStation. So there's that kind of thing of like, are they even aware of that? Because 10 years is a long time, and it isn't at the same time. And I think, especially in the way, if you considered how much gaming has grown, even if you said between 2000 and 2010, and then 2010 and now, there's been a far bigger growth of gaming in between then, and like the popularity and how it's a lot more mainstream. Seeing 3 PlayStation adverts in a cinema 12 or so years ago is a bit like, what would that even happen now that it's like on all the time?
Right.
It's just a much bigger thing. So I think to that end, introducing a remake this soon does kind of make sense. But again, kind of going back to what you said originally, I don't want it to become too much all the time, just like remake after remake after remake. you do want there to be obviously the new IPs. I think it was Blue Point Games who were initially doing a lot of the remakes are now developing their own IP. So I would like to still see the new stuff mixed in and not too many, because I don't want there to. I mean, it's the same thing that people complain about with cinema. It's just too many remakes and sequels. And that could be what happens. I mean, sequels in games are like far more common, but you don't want it to just get to a point where you're just rehashing all of the things that came out before. But yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one though. I think it has its pros and cons. And I suppose it just would depend, because I think so many people will say, sorry to like rant on some.
No, keep going.
Just to like, so many people will say there's no need to remake a game like the last, like it looks amazing today, but like it does and it doesn't. I think that game will age. If you put that up to something like, I don't know, Horizon Forbidden West, or I'm trying to think, or like Returnal, and you're showing like a brand new PS5 game and lining that up with The Last of Us, even on the PS4 remaster, you're going to see the differences there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I think it is similar in the sense that like with each new generation, we're just refining. We're not making the big jumps that we used to in terms of going from 2D to 3D. We're now just getting quicker load times and slightly better graphics.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because there's the argument that you shouldn't really touch stuff that's come before because it's kind of everything is of its moment, right? I just think remakes are so popular because nostalgia is such a powerful like driving force. It feels like, especially in games, but like obviously it affects everything.
Right? Yeah. I mean, looking at some of these, would you say you've got Demon's Souls was a big PS5 one. We had Final Fantasy VII. Supposedly Mafia was a full from the ground up remake. And then upcoming, we've got Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, and Knights of the Old Republic. Those last two in particular do feel like, when were those out? That was PS2, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm. So stuff like that, I can fully get behind.
I think remakes do offer like an opportunity to improve on what came before. So like you were saying earlier, The Last of Us on PS3, and to an extent the remaster probably haven't aged like amazingly well. I think they probably would still play fine, but for a new audience, and like you said, also like maybe a brand new audience who maybe has higher expectations of what games offer, it's a good opportunity to kind of be like, The Last of Us is like this, one of the most revered games ever, right? So like here's this new way to engage with the origin of Joel and Ellie's journey, and it's presented, in a more updated way. Maybe some gameplay is smoothed out, and maybe there's some like new stuff as well. That's another.
I would actually be interested to see if there was anything added for this, to like try not keep too much on this one, but like that is like a major point for me, is like if they were to update the gameplay in a way to match part 2, how much would that impact how you play part 1? Because there's like the prone mechanic, there's like it's a lot more flexible.
True.
In part 2, they have a jump button. So like how does that change in impact how you play The Last of Us part 1? But anyway, I mean, rounding this out in some way or another. Overall, do you think it's something that's beneficial to the games industry? Do you think it's something that we are better for, or would you just rather we focus on new experiences, new IP, and all of it from like these old companies?
I think that it's obviously very important that like we have the main focus be on like new stuff, new sequels, and like new games and new ideas and innovations. But I don't think there's anything wrong with there being like a small portion of games that look backwards as well. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And like some of them are just like fantastic. Like you think about like the Tony Hawk remake. right?
Yeah.
That's just like a straight banger. Like it's just like amazing. It's like really smooth and obviously looks and sounds great. Really good soundtrack and just modernizes the whole package. And it obviously has both games in the one thing. I just think that's a really smart way to revitalize enthusiasm for a property that's kind of lapsed, right? And the same goes for like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot and stuff. Like it's brought all of those kind of like back into the modern era in a really nice way, where people who have fond memories of those can be like, "Oh, this is great! I remember playing this when I was, I don't know, like 14 or whatever, and I want to play it again now that I'm like 32." So you got that aspect, and then you've got the like, you know, a new audience playing on PS4 or PS5 who have heard about, like, you know, oh, Crash Bandicoot's obviously a pretty memorable character. I want to see what this is all about. And then he's got, off the back of like a very successful remake, he's had like a brand new game, which was also very good. So I think it's in a healthy place right now where there's not too many of them. I think some people would probably argue that there are too many, but I think the balance is about right, and I think it's nice to have some games look back on like the top draw stuff and bring it back for newer players.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been kind of playing devil's advocate here, but I am fully on board with a lot of the remakes that have come out. Personally, like, I'm really looking forward to I'm hoping the eventual Resident Evil 4 remake, just because I've been loving re-experiencing those games as like modern games rather than something, as I said, like I wouldn't really go back to it. Is there anything, like, to really put you in the spot here, if you can come up with anything, is there any games that you would love to be remade? Like from back in the day, like something that stands out that you just like, imagine that with 4K, 60 FPS, you know, haptic feedback, quick loading times and all of that. Everything there.
I mean, people who know me might know what I'm going to say, but I'm a humongous fan of Burnout. So I would love like a remake of like Burnout 1, 2, 3, and Revenge, because they're just so good. Like especially 3 was kind of like the first one I played, and like I have such fond memories of playing that on PS. So I played it to death, and to have that back. I mean, I think it was 60 frames anyway, but like to have it back in a modern capacity.
Well, the like fancy little details and stuff as well.
Yeah, exactly, and like, you know, make the online really nice to play, and because there's nothing really like that at the moment. So I think I mean, obviously you had the remaster of Paradise, but my heart lies with the linear older Burnouts. So I'd love to see those come back.
As someone that only came up with this question about a minute ago, I didn't actually really have one in mind for myself. So I'm going to be really basic here and say I would love to see the Red Dead Redemption remake, to bring it up. Well, I would actually like it to surpass what the quality of Red Dead 2, purely because I think the gameplay in those games is in a serious need of an overhaul. That's just a Rockstar complaint I've got there. But I mean, bringing Red Dead up to scratch with the same kind of details that we saw and just running as well, like, I think that could be really incredible. Especially with how good open, like in terms of details, how good open worlds can be now, but like have that where it has that initial, you know, that charm that Red Dead had. So that's one that I would really love to see. But anyway, we've been ranting for ages now, so thanks everyone for listening. Let us know down below your thoughts on this whole topic, and as always, leave a like in the video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and we'll see you next time on Push Square.